Okay, per the usual, I am recording this, so if at some point I go too fast or you need to refresh on something later on, feel free to check that out on the YouTube channel. One quick announcement before we fully get the show on the road. A bunch of you have been emailing me saying that you called the number on the Canvas webpage, the opening webpage, and I didn't answer. That's because that's my office phone number. And if you call that at 9:30 at night, I'm not going to answer because I'm not up here. So that number on the Canvas webpage, once again, is the office phone number. If there is an emergency and you need to contact me, i.e. emergency, emergencies would be classified as things like you were in the middle of your test and you got kicked out, or you're running late for class, things like that. So if that happens, you can call my cell number, which that number is, if you need it, 432-923-2880. I said that the first day, but people keep calling the office number for questions, and they call it like 10:30 at night and 9:30 at night, and I don't live up here, so I'm not going to answer that number. Although, little side story, my very, very first teaching job was at a middle school. And I will never forget, this little boy thought that teachers lived at the school and they never went home. And he thought they only got to see their husbands and their kids on the weekends. So I'll never forget that. And I never assume that people think that we go home now. Now I know. Just a reminder that there is no class tomorrow. Tomorrow is a Friday. You guys should take advantage of that opportunity and finish your short essays if you are not done with that. Some topics that you could spend time going over in your short essay are: what is art? What are the 5 traits of creativity? Is it representational art? Is it non-representational art? Is it outsider art? Is it an artist with formal training? What is the purpose of the art piece? That's an easy one to do. What is the composition? What are the principles of design that the artist used in that artwork? And what critical theories could you use to analyze that art piece? Those are just some suggestions. Never would I recommend you use all of them because that would be a really, really long paper, and that's just a short essay that you're doing. If for whatever reason you're not sure about the art piece that you chose, feel free to email me an image of it and I can look over it and let you know if it'll work or not. Probably it'll be fine. Most often it's fine. Okay, now that's it for announcements today. We are going to finally start going over some of the different mediums in art. Can someone refresh us as to what a medium is? Material, yes. So what is the art made of? What did the artist use to make this art piece? Very good. So my people online, you should be seeing a PowerPoint.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. Is the image of it okay? Does it need to be bigger or smaller?
It's fine to me.
Okay, just checking, because with a new computer, the screen's different and things change. Okay, so to get us started with drawing, Drawing is the most basic medium that artists can use. It's very easily accessible, it's cheap, and it's very portable. A lot of times artists will start off using drawing in preparation for using more complex mediums such as painting, filmmaking, so on and so forth. An example of an artist that made use of drawing as a medium is Henry Moore. Henry Moore is usually known as a sculptor. He's a British artist, but during World War II, he did make use of the easy access and portability that drawing utensils had, and he would do shelter drawings. So during World War II, London was frequently bombed by the Germans, and people would often seek shelter from these bombings in the underground tube stations or train stations. It was hard to get things like cameras and paints and things down there because you were under a raid. So kind of a fast, momentary thing. So what Henry Moore did instead is he would take paper and pencils with him down there, and he would sketch out what he was seeing to help pass the time. And that's what we see here. So here you see the tube station. There's a bunch of people sleeping while the raid's taking place. This is done using pencil, wax crayon, which is another drawing medium, colored crayons, another drawing medium. Some watercolor was added later on, and wash, which is like a watery ink, and then pen and ink. Okay, pretty much everyone can draw. Some people can draw better than others. Children often start off drawing before they can ever read or write. It is a learned process. The definition of drawing, in case you ever needed to know the definition of drawing, is to push, pull, or drag a marking tool across the surface to leave a mark. But I'm pretty sure everyone in here knows what drawing is. Like I said, oftentimes drawing is done in preparation for a larger project. It's also done for taking notes and quick sketches of ideas. I'm getting my classes confused. Sorry. No, it's fine. I'm losing track of time. We're on the Renaissance period in my night class, and I was like, Da Vinci's popping up again in the same week. What? So Da Vinci is a great example of an artist that made use of sketchbooks and drawings for quick note taking, which he'll pop up again when we get to the Renaissance period. Here is his sketch of the facial proportions of a man in profile. And you see right here, there's little squares going on. You could kind of make it out in the Henry Moore drawing as well. That's like a measurement system to help people get proportions and scale correct on drawings and paintings. Specifically drawings, because if you remember, I said drawings are usually done in preparation or studying for something else. This was a study done to try and get proportions for a profile correct. So that's why he has that scale left over there, so that when he wants to reuse it or make it larger, he can take whatever measurements on here and use a ratio system to change it for a painting. Okay, speaking of sketchbooks, even producers for films will often use sketchbooks to detail storylines, characters, come up with characters, make preliminary sketches of characters. And that's exactly what Guillermo del Toro did in Pan's Labyrinth, which whoever wrote this book must really love that movie because it pops up like 4 times. Has anyone seen that? Yeah, it's not that great. It's okay. It is supposed to be a spooky movie, so maybe the perfect time of year to take a look at it. So there's 2 kinds of drawing that we're going to be looking at today. There's receptive drawing, which is trying to capture how things actually look, their physical appearance, and how they appear to our eye. There is projective drawing is making up something that only exists in our brain. It is important to keep in mind with receptive drawing, even though you're trying to capture realism in a piece, it's still not going to be the actual piece that you're trying to sketch. It's just a drawing. A great example sketchbook and someone doing that projective drawing is that sketchbook over Pan's Labyrinth, which is done with a bunch of made-up characters that don't actually exist in real life. So another example of projective drawing can be seen in Martin Ramirez's Untitled number 111. This is a drawing of a train passing through a tunnel, and it is based on the artist's imagination. Right here. His drawings are actually extremely popular today too. You can buy them on that artsy.net website that I mentioned yesterday. He pops up pretty frequently. So drawing is a deeply important process for, like I said, it's usually a preliminary study or sketch. It helps artists get their ideas down quickly on paper, and then they can take those ideas and make larger works. Some artists are really, really great at drawing to start off with. Other artists have to develop the skill, and that's something that I frequently come across when I'm talking to students over in the art building that are taking art courses. They get frustrated with themselves in their inability to do certain things like drawing and painting. And I constantly remind them, it's something that you have to develop. Some people are like naturally born with it, but a majority of people have to constantly practice and hone that skill. Even I get frustrated when I'm trying to draw things sometimes because they don't turn out the way that I wanted them to do. But it takes a lot of practice and drawing the same things over and over again before you get better. Great examples of really famous artists that had to hone that skill are Paul Cézanne and Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh was not very good at drawing. We're going to see him progress throughout time, but he felt like he needed to master drawing before he could move on to painting. Here is one of his earlier drawings of a carpenter. The proportions are obviously not correct. It's kind of flat. And just a 2 year later time span, this is what he was able to create with drawing and constant practice. This one's obviously a lot more realistic than the previous one. And you know he had to spend a lot of time practicing to get there. Cezanne was the same way. He started off not being the best drawer and practiced quite a bit before he got to a spot that he was comfortable with. So, like I said, Van Gogh felt like he had to master drawing before he could move on to anything else. He's most well known today for his paintings, obviously. He's the one that does the Starry Night painting that we looked at a few days ago. But like I said earlier, you can never make a drawing super realistic. Photography will eventually be invented when we're going through these mediums, and photography ends up trumping drawing because it can show things a lot more realistically than drawings had been able to thus far in history. So today we know that you can also fake photographs, but when photography first came out, people didn't realize that. So artists hated photography when it first came out. They thought it was taking their jobs, but we'll talk about that more when we get to photographs. Some artists tried to achieve realism, like making things as realistic as possible. Others like to create simple drawings, such as the Japanese style that Vincent van Gogh liked to follow, which we see here. This is a ink drawing done in a more Asian influenced style. Van Gogh is very inspired by Asian prints that were coming to Europe around that time period. So it's not super realistic at all. It's very loose. So drawing does serve several functions. It serves as a quick way to sketch something that you've seen or sketch something to remind yourself of it. It's done in preparation for other works, or it can be the end-all creation itself. Sometimes drawings are just drawings and they aren't done for anything other than creating a drawing. A great example of an art piece that was done as a study is the reclining male nude right here. This ended up becoming the painting on the Sistine Chapel ceiling of God creating Adam. So this was done as a preliminary sketch. We're also going to look at Picasso's studies for his large masterpiece, Guernica. This is his first sketch for that study. Picasso is an interesting guy. This is his second sketch, a lot more detail. And then this is the end piece. So those are just examples of artists that use drawings for preliminary sketches and studies. Picasso is quite a bit different from Michelangelo. Sometimes those preliminary sketches are not the finished pieces. Sometimes sketches do end up becoming the finished piece. A great thing to think about is cartoons. Not in a sense that we think of cartoons today as in animated television shows, but cartoons in the art term cartoon. Cartoons are preliminary sketches done for large pieces of art, such as frescoes or tapestries. We're going to talk about frescoes next week with painting on Monday. But frescoes are large wall paintings done on plaster. And if you mess up a fresco, you have to jackhammer that section off. So you do not want to mess up a fresco. So what artists do instead to help ensure they won't mess it up is they do a life full-size drawing of the art piece on paper. So they have a guide to follow when they're doing that fresco so they don't have any mistakes. Same with tapestries. If you are weaving a tapestry and you mess up on a section, you have to unweave that section and start over. To ensure that you're not going to mess up, you do a preliminary full-size sketch called a cartoon. So cartoons themselves are very interesting to look at because they are full-size sketches and they are done with the colors that are intended for the art pieces. So a lot of times museums will go and can collect those cartoons and consider them artworks themselves. They become treasures, I think it says. An example of, I guess we're not going to look at an example. I'll pull up an example really fast because that's kind of an important vocabulary word that's going to pop up quite often in class. So these images here are Raphael's cartoons that he did for a tapestry. You can kind of understand looking at this why the cartoons or the preliminary sketches themselves would probably be considered treasured items, just because they are as detailed and colorful as the end resulting tapestries are. So Raphael would make these full-size tapestry drawings in cartoon format. And then these cartoons would be sent off to a weaving factory and weavers would actually make those tapestries. Raphael didn't make the tapestries himself. He didn't weave things. Weaving was considered women's work, so men didn't usually do it. But he did make the preliminary drawings and you can see the creases where it's been folded for transportation. So different tools and techniques that you will come across when it comes to drawing are with lines. Oftentimes you will see artists use something called hatching and cross hatching. Hatching and cross hatching and contour hatching, that third one there, help to create shadows and dimension and depth to the drawings to make them look a little bit more realistic. It's the idea of putting lines on top of lines until you get the shade that you're trying to achieve in the drawing. There is a specific paper that's used for drawing, and normally if we weren't under a pandemic, I would pass around a sheet of paper that's used for drawing, but I don't feel like we should probably pass around paper from person to person. But it has a smooth tooth or texture. Other papers that we're going to talk about, watercolor paper, for example, has a rougher, thicker, coarser texture to it. Drawing paper is very smooth. And I mean, if you really are curious about different kinds of papers, just go to Hobby Lobby and go down the paper section in the craft aisle and you'll see all the different kinds of paper and you can feel all the different textures. So I'm actually going to come back to that one. Here's hatching. Hatching is just putting lines next to each other. Cross hatching is overlapping lines in different directions. Cross hatching is how you get those really deep, dark shades. And then contour hatching is used to try to make the appearance of curves on a flat surface. And you can see all of those used here with Charles White's Preacher, especially these dark spots. These really, really dark spots are done using cross-hatching. The more you overlap and crisscross, the darker it's going to get. The contour hatching is used up here in the fabric areas to try and create the appearance of curves. And then on his nails, you can see just regular hatching in here. You can see really loose cross hatching in the background. Going back to this one really fast. There's a lot of different drawing tools. The most basic one is a pencil. Although I say basic and there's a ton of different pencils used for drawing. Your most basic drawing pencil is your #2 pencil. But there's actually a scale of pencils, which once again, if we weren't under a pandemic, I would be passing those pencils around the classroom so that people could understand what I'm talking about. But pencils range from 6H to a 9B. H means fine and B means a thicker. So what I'm saying is your #2 pencil is like in the middle. It's #2 HB. The lead inside of that is a 2 in width. If you go up to a 9B, the lead inside gets thicker and denser, meaning you'll get a darker line with that. If you go down to a 2H, or not 2H, 6H, the lead inside is thinner, meaning you'll get a lot lighter line with that. So if you're really interested, once again, go to Hobby Lobby and look at their pencil packets and you'll see that the pencils don't get thicker, but the lead inside becomes thicker or thinner. After your pencil, which by the way, there's also colored pencils that are used in art too, but I kind of forget this because I think we all know there's colored pencils. Beyond that, you can also buy just graphite itself in stick form, which is solid sticks of graphite with no wooden pencil around it. You can also buy charcoal. Charcoal is a very solid blacker than pencil. Pencil kind of has that silvery gray tone to it. Charcoal is very black. It's flaky and chalk-like. So if you're going to use charcoal, at the end, you're going to have to set that drawing with like a hairspray or some sort of a spray to adhere it to the paper. Since it is a chalk, it'll flake off if you don't. There's two kinds of pastels. There's oil pastel, which is an oil-based colored, I want to say crayon, but crayons are wax. It's like a crayon, but oil instead of wax. There's also chalk pastels, which are like chalk, like sidewalk chalk, just more pigmented. There's also ink. You can use ink with a brush, which is what they would do in Asia, in China and Japan and Korea with their drawings. You can also use ink with an ink quill. There's different sizes of quills too, depending on what size you choose. It'll hold more or less ink on it. So this one has a thicker quill, so it obviously holds more ink on it. This one has a thinner quill, it holds less ink. And you can also get ink in a regular pen. There's also markers. So there's quite a few different drawing mediums that get overlooked that we kind of forget about. It's more than just pencil. Okay. We're going to start going over those different drawing media now, starting with the dry media. Dry media are charcoal, your Conte crayon, and your chalk pastels. well, oil pastels. Anything that doesn't require a liquid falls under dry media. So graphite also falls under dry media. These different dry medium, charcoal, Conte Crown, pastels, pencils have different varying degrees of hardness. The softer something is, the darker it's going to be, the harder it is, the lighter it's going to be. And next, we're going to look at different examples of artists that have used these dry medium. I used to take art studio courses as like electives my freshman year of college, because you know you have like time that you got to fill in. You're supposed to take like a required amount of classes. Um, I did this not realizing that studio courses are about 4 hours long and that you have to buy all of the supplies for it yourself. The first studio course I took was a drawing course. It was every Tuesday and Thursday. It was 4 hours long each Tuesday and Thursday. And I think the supplies cost me $150. So being an artist is expensive and time consuming. End of the story there. It was well worth it. I learned a lot of interesting things and I got to go through the frustrations of learning how to draw. Here is Berto Baccioni's State of Mind, The Farewells. For this, he uses several different dry medium drawing tools. He uses charcoal and Conte Crown. Those darker areas are where he uses the Conte Crown. The lighter wispier areas have the charcoal. And of course, like I said, if he was going to do this, he would need to set it with some sort of a spray adherent at the end, or else that charcoal will eventually, with time, disappear. And fun fact, both of those particular medium are very messy. Very, very messy. And stained, they don't come out things. And that's something that I forgot to mention. Some of these dry medium, if you make a mistake, you can just erase it like a pencil. But with things like ink and charcoal, if you make a mistake, you're stuck with it. Especially charcoal. There's not an eraser that will take charcoal off of paper. So it's a little bit different than pencil. So like I said, charcoal, it's a dry media. It's very flaky and chalky, but it is easy to get really dark shading with it. And you can also get lighter wispier areas with it as well. And of course, you'll need that fixative varnish to set it in place when you're done. If you don't mind giant messes, charcoal is a very fun medium to start off learning to draw with because you can get really deep, dark shades and really light shades. So there's a wide shading range with it, and it's pretty easy to start off using. But like I said, it's super messy. So don't wear any nice clothes and don't work in an area that you don't want to get messy because it's going to stain stuff. Another example of an artist that used charcoal is Vija Clemens in Web number 5. And in this one, you can see really great usage in the gradient shading that charcoal has. Of course, this is a reverse image. So the white is actually the paper showing through. But you can now buy white charcoal, which is fun, but it's not really charcoal. Charcoal is actually burnt wood. So, white charcoal is kind of like a fake charcoal. Another dry media is Conte Crown. It's pretty similar to charcoal, but it's a little bit more waxy. This is what normal people would call Crayola crowns, but in the art world, we call them Conte crowns. And you can see that used in George Seurat's L'Echo. And then our next dry medium is pastels. Like I said, there's an oil pastel and there's a chalk pastel. Chalk pastels are very similar in texture and usage to charcoal. Oil pastels are very smooth and easy and fun to use. Both of them are messy. So here is your Conte crayon being used. Like I said, it's just a fancy word for a crayon, a regular basic crayon. And next we'll look at our pastels with Rosalba Carrera's Portrait of a Girl with a Bussola. And here is another example of pastels by Edgar Degas. Same medium, very different usage. Okay, moving on from our dry media to our liquid media, aka ink. There's different colors in ink. The basic ones are black and brown. You can apply ink once again with a quill, a pen, or a brush. You can also thin out your ink and create a wash using water. So if you want it to have a thinner, lighter shade, you just have to add water to it. Just a reminder that the first people groups to use ink in drawing were Eastern artists in Asia, and then it traveled to Europe and the rest of the world from there. So, of course, we will be looking at some Japanese art to start off with. First one is by Hokusai, tuning the samisen. Hokusai is the artist that does the Great Wave print that's super, super popular. And using ink and drawing originated from calligraphy. So if you're familiar with China, calligraphy began in China and they used brushes. Calligraphy itself was considered an art form. And then the calligraphy moved over to Japan, which we'll talk about this later on when we get to the multicultural sections in art history. But it moved to Japan and they also adopted it. And both of those cultures then in turn began to use ink and brush to create paintings as well. And here is Hokusai's Tuning the Samisen. Another example of this time European artist that uses ink, watered down ink, and white gouache. Gouache it has the consistency of whiteout. If you've ever used like straight liquid whiteout, not the tape, it has that consistency and that pigment. Because if you noticed when I said ink, there wasn't a white. So if you want white, you'd have to use gouache. See used here in certain areas. So this was done with a Reed ink pen. That was that pen with the quill on an end that I mentioned earlier. Some brown ink and brown wash. Brown wash ink is just a ink that's been watered down. And then your white gouache. Here's Nancy Spiro's piece, once again done with ink and gouache. Okay, and we are getting close to the end. Some artists, like I mentioned at the beginning, will use drawing as an ends to create a final art piece. So now we're going to look at different examples of artists that use drawing to create final art pieces, starting off with comics and graphic novels. So comic artists, their primary means of making money is by drawing. And drawing for them is the final artwork. It's not a preliminary sketch. It's not taking notes. It is the final art. And of course, comics and graphic novels are using drawing to tell stories. The idea of using drawing to tell stories began at first with the ancient Egyptians and their murals and hieroglyphs, and it has developed since then. And of course, comics and graphic novels today are extremely popular. An early example of a comic strip is Winsor McCay's Little Nemo in Slumberland, which once again just tells a story using drawing. And another example of someone that uses drawing for comics. We're next going to look at Persepolis, which is another example of a comic. I'm going kind of fast because I think you guys probably know what comic strips and graphic novels are. And now we're going to move on to contemporary approaches to using drawing as a medium. Oftentimes artists, if they're using drawing as the final art piece, they will create a mixed media piece. Does anyone remember what mixed media is?
Using a combination of materials.
Very good. Thank you, Courtney. So yeah, mixed media or mixed medium means we're using a combination of different materials. So with contemporary drawing today, if artists are creating a final art piece, oftentimes they'll pair it with other medium, which is exactly what we see in the next art piece that I'm not going to try and pronounce today because I've already had problems speaking. Sometimes I go for it and I just take a chance, but not today. Yep. And here is that artwork there. So the artist here has combined ink drawing with acrylic paints. So she has combined painting and drawing. Another example of an artist that has taken a little bit more of a unique approach to drawing is Hybert's Reconnaissance. Instead of using the normal dry media or wet media, Hybert used painter's tape to create lines. If you remember, the definition of drawing is to just leave a mark on something. And that is exactly what Hybert did here. Yeah, I know. This one's funny. It's like someone just randomly put blue painter's tape on a wall. Yeah. It doesn't look like a green art piece. Like you think someone just messed up their painter's tape and they were gonna paint something there and just didn't. And another example of a contemporary take on drawing, this artist used colored pencil and tracing mylar or tracing paper. Colored pencils are a relatively new medium for artists. And then the newest form of artworks that are being produced today are drawings on computers and iPads and things like that. So not drawing using our normal tools once again, but using more innovative technologies. And we see that used by the British artist David Hockney right here. And we rounded out there. We actually started with the beginning materials, just your basic pencil and paper or ink and paper, and we've moved throughout drawing history into contemporary technologies. We've covered all of the different materials that artists use for drawing. Of course, like it mentioned on the previous slide, the more things that are invented, the more drawing changes. That applies to all of the other medium as well that we're going to be covering in this class. The more new things that are invented, the more the artists latch onto them and try them and play with them, creating new and interesting artworks. So that's important to keep in mind as we continue next week going through mediums with painting and printmaking and film. Film's always a fun day. That's my favorite one. So any questions about drawing? No. What I want you guys to do the rest of this class period is work on your group projects a little bit. I would recommend that if you haven't picked your stance yet, you do that. If you have picked your stance, good. Maybe start coming up with some ideas for arguments. I'm going to stick around on Teams once again until 9:20. So if you need help coming up with some ideas, feel free to ask. Okay. And you came in late. What was your name again? Okay. Ty is here. Courtney, was Ty in your group?
Yes.
Okay. So Ty, your group is with Courtney. You guys had a discussion going on Canvas, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you might want to check in on their discussion.
Okay.
Or get their numbers or something so they can text you.
Okay.
I think is Sadie there in class?
Sadie here? Yeah, Sadie is here. Okay, Ty and Sadie are both here.
Okay, I was gonna say she might be able to fill him in.
Yeah. And of course, just a reminder once again that